North America is burning. Millions of acres of land in Canada has been reduced to ashes. Canada is struggling to control wildfires that have now spread across the country. And these wildfires are the worst Canada has ever seen. So the impact has been quite catastrophic, not just for Canada, but also its southern neighbor and close friend, the United States. Cities in the US have been turned into smoke chambers. Perhaps the worst hit is the world's Big Apple, New York City. It is now one of the most polluted cities in the world. The air quality in New York is now more hazardous than in New Delhi. USA's biggest cities suddenly find themselves breathing the proverbial third world air. Here's a report.
Americans find themselves in a hazardous situation, quite literally, because the air has been polluted like never before. New York City now has the world's most polluted air. Take a look at this. These are not scenes from some apocalyptic film. This is what New York City looks like. Now imagine living in this city. If you're watching this report from Delhi, you know what breathing this air feels like. But at least the air in Delhi doesn't turn orange. This is what the George Washington Bridge looks like now, or whatever part of it is still visible. For somebody who doesn't have the proper context, you'd probably think New York has been the victim of an unprecedented sandstorm. Or worse, been struck by a biological weapon that has made the air toxic. Now, while New York and many other American cities do look like apocalyptic ghost towns, life must go on. With all necessary precautions, of course.
I've been advising people where possible, stay inside. Even though the air outside will ultimately find its way inside, the levels will be reduced. Also, this is not the time to be playing tennis or jogging or getting ready for a marathon. Go easy on your lungs. Don't do anything that requires deep, heavy breathing. Maybe better to walk versus bicycle if you can, just to keep things light.
Go easy on your lungs. That's the message from authorities. Just to give you an idea of how things spiraled out of control in a matter of days, on June 3rd, the air quality index of New York was 15. Now it's hovering anywhere between 350 to 500. And that's over 56 times higher than the World Health Organization's safety limit. You'd think we're singling New York out, but this is not the case. After all, smoke coming out of Canada is hovering over northeastern US and the Midwest. Places like Wisconsin, Syracuse, and Minnesota haven't been spared either. Let's talk about Canada for a bit. The situation in this North American country is dire. Canada is battling its severest wildfire season on record. Over 8.2 million acres of land have already been burned. At this very moment, there are about 400 active wildfires still raging in Canada. And more than a half of them have been declared out of control. Over 12,700 square miles of forest and land has been destroyed. It's the sheer scale of the crisis in Canada that's sending ripple waves across the American continent. Smoke emanating from wildfires can be very toxic. This is due to the presence of particles called PM2.5. Any particles with a diameter of less than 2.5 micrometers fits this category. Do you know why these particles are dangerous? because they're able to get past our natural defenses. These are small enough to enter our lungs from where they can start flowing in the bloodstream. These particles can cause irritation in the eyes, nose, throat, and lungs. But they can also trigger more severe conditions like asthma attacks. Breathing such air can have a number of detrimental effects. But Americans can breathe easy knowing that this is a temporary situation and not an all-year-round phenomenon. The same can't be said for many Asian cities.
Annecy. It's an idyllic town in the south of France, nicknamed the Pearl of the French Alps. But today, the town woke up to a horrific incident, a mass stabbing attack. 6 victims, including 4 children. The victims are as young as 3 years old. That's the latest. So let's talk about how the attack took place. It was around 9:45 a.m. local time. Children were playing at a playground, one located near the town's famous lake. This is when a man armed with a knife entered this playground. Disclaimer alert, the details get gory from here. He began to stab a group of children as young as 3. Witnesses describe people running, crying, panicking.
Now it will take time until parents again take their children to playgrounds, since I think the trauma will stay forever in the town of Annecy. Because this is the first time this has ever happened here, as far as I know. But now things like this will happen again in places that we don't expect. That's what will happen. Everyone expects this to happen in big cities like Marseille, Paris, or Lyon. But now the target will be places where no one expects it, to put fear into people.
I would like to reiterate how terrified we are as people of Annecy, as French people, at this appalling attack on young children under the age of 2, just a few years old, in the heart of Annecy, in the historic Pakistani garden. It was an attack on humanity that took place this morning, an attack on our very soul, where young children playing outside school hours were attacked by an individual.
He then ran from that scene, attacking another man who was walking nearby. It was at this point that the police intervened. They quickly overpowered him. Reports suggest he was shot in the legs. Soon, he was arrested at the scene. In fact, the Interior Minister tweeted about the arrest, lauding the rapid reaction of security forces. Police have confirmed that the man is a 31-year-old Syrian who had refugee status in Sweden. The mayor of Annecy called it an appalling attack. French President Emmanuel Macron has denounced the stabbing on Twitter, calling it an act of absolute cowardice. The National Parliament too observed a minute's silence for the victims. For the town of Annecy, it was a moment of shock, a moment of horror. This is a town people go to a vacation. Many of them can't even imagine such an incident. But France is no stranger to these attacks. 2015, the attack on the Charlie Hebdo magazine, 12 people killed. 2015 again, the Paris attacks, the deadliest attacks in the history of France. 130 people killed. 2016, the Bastille Day attacks in Nice, 84 people killed. 2017 stabbing incident in Marseille, 2 women killed. 2020, another attack in a Paris suburb. The beheading of a teacher in broad daylight. 2022, a shooting incident in Paris, 3 killed, 3 others injured. And lastly, in January of 2023, another stabbing incident, that too at a Paris station. I know the list sounds long, almost never ending, but this is one of France's biggest problems right now. Islamist attacks and threats they can't counter. Homegrown terrorism is a huge worry for France, one that's fueling anti-migration sentiments in the country. Many of these attackers belong to migrant communities or those seeking asylum in the country. Some of them were French citizens but felt they were excluded from the French society. Experts have said it is unfair to blame immigration for the attacks. But for French right wing, this has been the perfect lightning rod. In fact, far-right leader Marine Le Pen blamed African migrants for crime in France. She called them a threat to French civilization. And a majority of France's population agrees. Data suggests immigrants account for a little over 10% of the population, around 7 million people. But the debate around them is far outsized. In fact, the government recently brought in a controversial bill, one that tries to deal with anti-immigration. The bill says it aims to control immigration while improving integration. But what it allows is greater deportation, especially for foreigners who commit crimes. Many slam it as racist, aiming to criminalize immigrants. It is still not sure how France will react to this attack, but it may reignite the anti-immigration debate. The attack is currently not being linked to terrorism. The French police are yet to confirm anything, and the details are still trickling in. Speaking of tense relationships, let's now look at the NATO. Cracks seem to be appearing in NATO's united front. There seems to be two distinct factions emerging. On one side are the Eastern European nations. They're determined to see Ukraine join the alliance. The nations are informally known as the Bucharest Nine. Leaders of the Bucharest Nine met in Slovakia's capital, Bratislava, on Tuesday. They were joined by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. The Eastern European nations had one demand: Ukraine needs to become part of NATO as soon as possible.
It is also clear that Ukraine should really become member of NATO. The question is when, and the answer is shortly or immediately after the war. Because only the full membership, not a half membership, but only the full membership of NATO can guarantee the peace in Ukraine and guarantee the peace in Europe.
Ukraine cannot be left in the gray zone anymore. We cannot risk a war in Europe again. Of course, we expect Sweden to become NATO member before we all meet in Vilnius. I have a strong feeling that it is still possible to achieve. I also have a special plea to allies to complete the process of ratification. There is no reason to stall the process right now. Let us unite our efforts so that 32 countries can sit at the NATO table in Vilnius.
The promises we make should also be kept. We have to give perspective for Ukraine's membership application to the NATO. And in order to be able to move forward in that sense, we have to see the soonest end to the war conflict in Ukraine.
It seems the Bucharest Nine are upping the stakes. The former head of NATO and current advisor to Zelensky, Anders Rasmussen, has issued an ultimatum. He said Ukraine needs security guarantees and a membership path at the next NATO summit. The summit will begin on July 11th in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. Rasmussen said if these steps aren't taken, there will be an escalation. He said Poland and the Baltic nations might take matters into their own hands. How? By sending their own troops into Ukraine. Yes, NATO members are apparently threatening to send their soldiers into the war zone. It would mark a huge escalation and risk direct involvement of NATO troops in Ukraine. Remember, NATO follows the principle of collective defense. An attack on one member is an attack on all. So what happens if Russia kills NATO member country soldiers while attacking Ukraine? Rasmussen's threat is being seen as a pressure tactic, a way to arm twist the other faction in NATO, the cautious faction. This includes Germany and the US. They are reportedly still wary about letting Ukraine join the alliance too soon. It could serve to anger Russia further. Current NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg seems to be attempting a fine balancing act. He made these two statements in Bratislava.
All allies agree that NATO's door remains open, that Ukraine will become a member of NATO, and that this is a decision that only allies and Ukraine can make. Russia does not have a right to veto NATO enlargement. At the B9 meeting today, we prepared a NATO summit, which will take place in Vilnius in July. At that summit, I expect allies to agree a multi-year package of assistance so that Ukraine transitions from Soviet-era doctrines, training and equipment to NATO standards, and to help it move closer to the alliance.
On one hand, he said Russia does not have the right to veto a NATO enlargement. On the other, he spoke of a multi-year assistance package, something to help Ukraine move closer to the alliance. He did not commit to Ukraine immediately joining NATO. Then yesterday, he said NATO must give security assurances to Ukraine when the war ends. Assurances, not membership. He also reiterated that NATO will provide full-fledged security guarantees to full members only. It's this kind of cautious approach that's making the Eastern European nations angry. It threatens to divide NATO. The US seems to have noticed the tense situation.
The President will welcome Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO, to the White House on Monday, June 12th, to discuss the upcoming NATO summit that's going to be occurring in Lithuania. President Biden and Secretary General Stoltenberg will review preparations for the summit, including the work to further strengthen allied deterrence and defense, build on the 2014 Wales Summit Defense Investment Pledge, and deepen NATO's partnership. They will also discuss ally support for Ukraine in the face of Russia's brutal war of aggression.
So will Washington give in to Eastern Europe's pressure, or will it stick with a cautious approach? We'll bring you more on this story as it develops. Now let's shift focus to Pakistan. It seems Pakistani politics is set to welcome a new player, the Istehkam-e-Pakistan party. It was announced amid some fanfare. Who are the members of this new party? Mostly former Prime Minister Imran Khan's one-time loyalists. Yes, the new party is made up of former Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf party leaders. The head will be Jahangir Khan Tareen, or JKT. He's a former lawmaker and a billionaire sugar baron. Reportedly one of Pakistan's richest politicians too. He's also a man Imran Khan had personally appointed as PTI Secretary General. A lot of other former PTI leaders were present during the party's announcement. Fawad Chaudhry, Ali Zaidi, Mahmood Maulvi and more were present for the celebration. These are people who had defected from the PTI after May 9. That's when violence had erupted across Pakistan. It followed Imran Khan's arrest. The violence eventually spread to military buildings. And after that, one by one, the PTI leaders started jumping ship. They resigned, saying they respected and stood with the Pakistani army. Most also said they were taking a break from politics. It seems that break didn't last long. In the recent weeks, frantic meetings have been conducted. The former PTI members have been meeting their old colleagues. Those colleagues locked up in prisons. We reported on this recently. We also mentioned that Imran Khan was watching this scheme, the scheme being called Minus Imran. Khan had said a new King's Party was being formed. Well, it seems the King's Party has been coronated, crowned with the name Istehkam-e-Pakistan. Imran Khan believes this party is being propped up by the Pakistani army, that the military establishment has been coercing his party members to abandon him.
It is completely the establishment. I mean, establishment obviously means the military establishment, because they are really now openly, I mean, it's not even hidden now, they're just out in the open. The threats now and the you know, two of my senior members went to called by the ISI for talks, who had nominated for talks. And when they went, they shut them up and said, look, you'll only leave unless you renounce being part of PTI.
He put out this translated WhatsApp message a few days ago. It purportedly shows the immense pressure being applied to engineer what he calls forced divorces. Now it seems Khan's estranged partners have gotten together to take him down. But Khan won't be surprised. After all, the new party was expected. It's a tried and tested gambit in Pakistani politics. For now, Khan has secured bail in the case for 14 days. But it seems Imran Khan's problems just keep piling up. Another case has been filed against the former Prime Minister. This time, it's quite grave. It's an abetment to murder case. The Pakistani police say Khan is involved in the murder of a lawyer who filed a sedition case against him. Abdul Razak was killed on Tuesday by unknown gunmen on a motorcycle. Razak's son, Siraj Ahmed, has linked the murderers to Imran Khan. How Khan is linked hasn't been made public as yet. Khan, of course, denies it. He keeps blaming the establishment.
उस आदमी का वकील का कत्ल होता है, फैमिली सारी कहती है कि खानदानी दुश्मनी थी, उस पर कत्ल हुआ है, वहां पहुंच जाते हैं, यानी वो पता चलता है कोई 9:30 बजे उसका कत्ल होता है, 4 घंटे के अंदर लॉ मिनिस्टर प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस कर देता है कि इमरान खान इसमें मुलव्वस था। 4 घंटे। कभी सोचें कि कोई कत्ल हुआ है, कोई इन्वेस्टिगेशन होती है, कोई पता चलता है, वो 4 घंटे में कहता है इमरान खान इसके अंदर मुलव्वस है। और उसके बाद क्या होता है? उसके बाद आईजी उठाता है उसके बेटे को, रात तक आईजी उसको अपने पास रखता है, और उससे फिर एक और स्टेटमेंट आ जाती है कि जी ये इमरान खान ने कत्ल करवाया मेरे बाप को।
Officials say Khan could face formal charges if and when the murder case goes to trial. The charges would become part of a very long list. And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. India has successfully tested a new generation ballistic missile. It's called Agni Prime. Meanwhile, wildfires in Canada are severely impacting parts of the United States. New Yorkers woke up to a hazy day that looked like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. And the Kilauea volcano erupted in Hawaii. This is one of the world's most active volcanoes. And finally, what makes June 8th significant? On this day in 1948, Air India's first international flight took off. It took off from erstwhile Bombay for London via Cairo and Geneva. Air India International came into being after industrialist J.R.D. Tata suggested that the Indian government should sponsor an international airline. We leave you with that. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.